Joining me right now from the Senate Appropriations Committee is Senator Bill Hagerty. Senator, great to have you this weekend. Thank you for being here.
It's always good to be with you, Maria. Thank you.
Is this going to move forward, taking funding away from these universities? How will you decide who gets what?
Well, we just passed through a massive appropriations package. We'll be looking at the next set right away. In fact, it's coming up over the course of the next several weeks. This is a top-of-mind issue for most of the senators. It's even a bipartisan concern. We've got to address this. The campuses have really just let things run wild. And Maria, it seems like this happens every presidential election year. You get you think about the Occupy Wall Street protests that took place back in 2012. You think about the BLM riots. Now we've got all of this. The college campuses have become a hotbed of discriminatory behavior, of violence. You've seen all the arrests. The American public are deeply concerned about it. Certainly those of us in the Senate are concerned about it too. And I think it's a manifestation of this, quote, DEI initiative that's gone way over the top. Now they've got these young people being indoctrinated in terms of this notion of someone's either oppressed or an oppressor. They're not asking what's happened. They're not asking what's behind all of this. They don't even seem to acknowledge the fact that October the 7th took place, the horrors that took place there. Instead, they're calling for genocide and threatening students on their own campus, and these college campuses are just becoming an area of violence and threatening behavior. It's got to come to an end. That's why you've seen the frustration coming from the Senate.
I'm trying to understand who specifically is behind this. The Wall Street Journal had an op-ed this week, Rules for Campus Radicals 2024, and they mentioned this website, crimethinc.com, a website that has become a hub for anarchists and Antifa activists and radical leftists. Recently, they published anonymous reports from around the country drawing lessons from various campus protests. They reveal methods behind the mayhem, and they tell people to occupy spaces where the classes are held and take over buildings. Who's behind it?
We need to get to the bottom of who's funding all of this. There's clearly a supply chain that's being supported. You look at the tents that are coming out, you see these people moving onto campuses. This is organized in some fashion. It's deeply concerning. I put forward legislation to stop foreign investors from coming in and affecting our elections here. Hans-George Wyss, a Swiss billionaire, is well known to come in and try to affect the outcome of elections here. This is very much part and parcel of the type of activity that these sorts of people are foaming and supporting and funding. We should absolutely get to the bottom of it because it's completely destroying the sense of safety on our campuses. This is not what parents are paying for. This is not what students deserve.
Well, your colleague, Senator Tom Cotton, announced a new bill that would stop any student who has been convicted of a crime during these anti-Israel protests from having their student loans forgiven. Do you support that?
Absolutely. This student loan forgiveness exercise, as you know, is going to fail in courts. It has continued to fail in courts. But our federal Department of Education has completely failed America. They spend all their time on this. They can't get student loan, they can't get financial aid applications even processed. Parents don't know what to do this year because of the ineptitude of the federal Department of Education. And now the federal Department of Education is not doing anything about the civil rights violations that are taking place in these campuses that they're theoretically supporting and overseeing. It's a grotesque failure. Tom is exactly right. We need to put supervision in place. We need to put consequences in place.
Meanwhile, Iranian state TV is reporting that Shiraz University in Iran is now offering free tuition to U.S. students who've been expelled over the anti-Israel protests. Shiraz University inviting U.S. professors also to continue their work there as well. Our adversaries are cheering on these protests, Senator, and to think that somebody is going to say, well, I was expelled from, Colombia, I think I'll go move to Iran and go to Shiraz University. Your thoughts?
Well, I think it underscores the fact that Iran is actually behind all of this. You recall in President Trump's administration, we imposed maximum pressure on Iran. We squeezed their reserve accounts down to below $8 billion. Hamas and Hezbollah had been completely defunded. President Trump was able to move our embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Against all the predictions, there was no war. We took out Soleimani. There was no war. What we saw was peace breaking out in the Middle East. As soon as Joe Biden comes into office, he again enriches Iran, stops imposing the sanctions immediately. And what we have right now is a direct byproduct of that. Joe Biden should be looking in the mirror right now and asking him why what's happening on these campuses, why what happened on October the 7th is happening, and he needs to look no further than his own policies.
And meanwhile, you've signed on to a letter with nearly 36 other Republican senators demanding that Joe Biden stop this proposal to bring Palestinian refugees from Gaza into America. The letter highlights national security risks with, quote, vetting this high-risk population for terrorist ties to Hamas. But the White House is pushing forward, assuring that they're taking the process, quote, very, very seriously. Do you think that the White House is going to move Palestinians from Gaza into America? Wouldn't that send a message to these anti-Israel protesters that they won, they got what they wanted, even though they caused all this chaos this week?
I think it very clearly is a concession to these protesters. This is about the politics of the American election in 2024. We're talking about Minnesota. We're talking about Michigan. We're talking about those states that Joe Biden needs to win the presidency, and he's doing a massive appeasement exercise. He certainly isn't talking about the Americans that are still held hostage in Gaza. They're doing nothing to get rid of, to address that situation in the open. But here we are. $3.5 billion was put in this last massive supplemental package that just passed the Senate. They didn't mention this up until the day the Senate passed it, and then immediately talked about opening 2 new offices, one of them in Turkey, one in Egypt. These offices are going to be used to process Palestinians from Gaza into America. Now, let me ask you this. In recent polling, 70% of Gazans support the October 7th attacks. We're not supposed to be bringing people into this country that support terror or have been involved in it. Yet this White House and this State Department somehow is going to be competent enough to vet this when we can't even protect our own southern border. I think Americans should be deeply concerned. I certainly am.
All right, we will leave it there. Senator, we are watching your work as usual. Thanks very much for being here.